This is the Dallas Morning News.
This episode is from an independent podcast hosted by the Dallas Morning News Opinion Team.
Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, it's you and me today.
We're alone.
We are. No guest.
Hey, we thought it might be fun to talk, given that this is Intersections and talking multi-generational, different perspective from the generation. Talk about a couple of those issues between you and I. And I look back and I think one of the things I always thought was a big deal was the way my mom looked at music and the way I looked at music. And I'm sure that's probably the case with your parents.
Yeah, my dad's been giving me grief over my music selection since I think I can remember. It's definitely been over 20 years. He didn't like my early 2000s rap choices that I listened to, and now he definitely doesn't understand the music comes out today with all the electronic beats and everything else. He grew up, obviously, Beatles and the old school music with lyrics and all the stuff.
Okay, so what was the first concert you ever went to?
It was an early pop concert. I mean, when I was 7 or 8, my sister dragged me to, an early pop. I don't know if it wasn't obviously Taylor Swift, but it was somebody in that kind of genre back in the late 90s.
So you ready? The first concert I ever went to? It was the Beatles on one of the initial concerts they ever did in the United States.
So what you're saying is you've listened to real music.
I have gone and listened to the Beatles. Now, I must have been, I was a little kid. And the way it happened is somebody that worked with my mom, she was secretary of mortgage companies, we've talked about, but somebody she worked with had daughters that were teenage, and the Beatles were a big thing. So as a special gift, she got tickets. And again, back then, getting tickets to concerts was a different exercise than it is today, both in terms of effort and price points.
Sure.
And so she got tickets to the Beatles. So she asked my mom, do you want to go along? So we drove from Phoenix to Las Vegas. It was in Las Vegas. And they pulled me along, and there was an extra ticket, so I went to it. So now I'm a little kid. The tickets were in the third row. I mean, it was literally throwing distance to Ringo Starr. And I can remember the entire time. And again, at this age, I didn't know what the Beatles were. I didn't know about it. All I remember is listening to teenage girls on each side of me literally scream for 2 hours without stopping. And at some point, I remember wanting to just say, hey, can we listen to the music?
So what you're saying is nothing's changed between a Beatles concert and a Taylor Swift concert as it stands today, because I think those same screaming girls are there.
I haven't done the Taylor Swift lately,
okay,
but I assume so.
Yes, it's good.
So there are differences, but let's talk about some issues, though, that really, I think, bring out some of the differences. And I'm going to be interested to get your perspective. And one that we have talked about, Gerald Turner was here. We've also talked about education with several other of our guests. It seems to me that that's a great example of how the generations view it. When I was in school, in college, one of the things that we really prized is, and I can remember it, we had opinions that went the entire gamut. They were right, left, up, down, everything. And that's what you were expected. That was one of the things in theory that you were getting out of school, is that idea of listening to other views, dissecting it, analyzing it, in some cases, having it affect your view too. And it doesn't seem like that's the case today.
No, I remember actually very distinctly growing up and going to a great private institution here in Dallas for lower school, middle school, and high school. And debate as the years went on seemed to wander less into actual critical theory and more into kind of like pigeonholing yourselves into you're in one camp or you're in another camp. And I think where we've lost is the ability to have a discord and have a conversation that really just spurs one another on to learn the other's viewpoint and to also be a great listener. One of the things that I really think our generation has lost in so many ways is this ability to listen, not react with any sort of visceral, negative opinion, but just to interact in a way that edifies and encourages the conversation to go in and to be a learner. And I think to hit on your point about education, there's so much about today's world where people are skeptical of education. They're skeptical of what's true. They're skeptical of what they believe. They're going to different corners of the internet or just their kind of cubby hole to find their information. and they're not going across the aisle, going across the line to really understand what does that other person see, think, believe, hear, and how has their experience influenced those things in their life.
I think there's two issues here, though, Kyle. I think one of them has to do how the generations perceive higher education and its role. So that's one. The second is, though, how the institution now has evolved to be a political force within greater society. So let's unpack both of those. On the first part of it, when I went to school, as I said, there was engagement back and forth and that sort of thing. And the fact you and I disagreed, we'd go at it in a classroom, we'd go at it in the dining hall or something like that, and then we'd go throw passes to you on intramural. Now what I see, however, is if I take a position that is counter to yours from a political standpoint, that all of a sudden is perceived as something, and a lot of different words for it, but hate speech, disrespectful, etc., all of those sorts of things. And where it was an institution that we really encouraged that, and to be truthful with you, had a lot of fun with it, now it seems like it's become very personal, very visceral, and in fact, it is, if you don't agree with me now, I will use very, very personal charges and attacks against you to put you in your place, quote unquote.
When think about the schools that come to mind when you think about this, so Columbia, obviously been in the news recently. You've got Harvard in the news recently. The Trump administration has gone deep after both of these institutions. And what's interesting, I've actually had the opportunity to lead some Bible studies of some high school kids that are deciding on where to go to college over the last, call it 5 years. And what's sad to me is that those institutions really were founded on the belief and the trust that the greater common good is moved forward by having the harder conversations rather than just going back into your own camp and kind of staying there. And I think that's what is sad is that as I see these kids make decisions on colleges, they're not dumb. I mean, these are kids graduating from private schools in North Dallas, and they've been taught critical theory, how to think on their feet, how to react and respond, how to ask questions. But in a lot of ways, they're, I think, fearful of engagement in that world because they're fearful of what the outcomes might be. No matter if they're on the left or the right and they look across the aisle, there's fear on all ends. And so they're making decisions to go to schools that are, let's say, a little bit more easy to get along with in a certain sense. The kids are more like-minded. It's easier to have the conversation and go to the intramural game and throw the pass and just have commonality. And I really think that is a really sad part of our generation right now that we're going to have to overcome to have better discord throughout the country.
But you can't walk away with the fact that today in, I would say, majority of higher education institutions, it now is a situation where there is one philosophy of thought. Yep. Nothing else is tolerated. And we get into the personal attacks, et cetera. And it seems to me, I've got fundamental problems with that. But it seems to me that it's also got implications for the individual that go far beyond that. For instance, if all of a sudden I will only listen to people that agree with me, I wonder how I solve problems. Second is if I will only tolerate people who say things that make me feel comfortable and good, I wonder how I'm going to approach the world and go out in the world and see that all of a sudden, not everybody's nice. Not everybody says things that agree.
Right.
And part of life, to me, is that you deal with these sorts of things. I mean, I can tell you in real life, there's a lot of folks that disagreed with me and they made it very known.
When it's you deal with it in family, you deal with it in the workplace, you're going to deal with it socially. I think an example here for this podcast as well is I look at one of our guests, John Wiley Price. He's not someone that I naturally would probably agree with everything he says. But what's been neat is actually even post the podcast, we've had the opportunity to collaborate together on a few items to hopefully push some things forward in the South Dallas community. And that's just an example of he didn't drive me away in his conversation or how he answered his questions. He actually pulled me in because I want to learn more about how his experiences have shaped the decisions he's made as county commissioner and or on the commissioner's court. Hello, and the way he's built his career and what he's learned through other people. And so I think there's just this generation needs to flip their mindset away from I'm in my camp and I'm not moving and I'm going to be totally fine with hearing exactly what I want to hear, to let's go extend some of the hand to the other side and say, hey, how did you think about that? Why did you come to that conclusion? Where did you get your information from? Again, be a great question asker and ultimately a great listener to inform your opinion.
Well, I think John Wiley Price is a great example. Again, we don't come from a lot of political issues together. But when we were both in public office, if we had kind of taken that point and kind of walked away from each other, I think we both would have lost, because the reality is there's some issues that I developed an enormous respect for him because of his knowledge, dealing with the court systems, issues associated with education, those sorts of things. We actually worked together on those because he's got a wealth of understanding in both of those areas that we kind of, I basically put to play for my benefit. Right. If you had stopped with that. And that's what really concerns me about this whole idea that this generation is comfortable with condemning the other side and basically putting them in a timeout that never comes back.
Yeah, it's a canceling in a lot of ways. I mean, we went through cancel culture forever.
So how do you look at that? I mean, that is your generation.
It is.
It is a lot of higher education today. And I think now what you're seeing is it's translating into the workforce. It doesn't just stop there. I'm thinking of, companies. I've been fortunate to lead a lot of good companies in my life. Never had a situation that Microsoft, some of the technology companies are having, where literally you're having thousands of people sign petitions that you need to change your business practices because we don't like the client that you're dealing with.
Like what they stand for.
For whatever,
bingo.
Maybe not even what they stand for, but even for a political reason like that. So that's going in. And Microsoft, as we just saw, they had several individuals that went in, basically took over an office, which is kind of like walking into a dean of students or the president of a college and taking it over. We've seen that before. Now they're doing it in corporate environment. I admire Microsoft. They fired 5 of them. And they basically said, we're not going to put up with this crap anymore, which I view it as that.
We don't tolerate it. Exactly. Well, and I think it's going to be a hard lesson for my generation to learn, especially the ones that are in college now and coming into the workforce. I would say this got elevated the last 4 years. If I look at just post-COVID up until the new Trump administration, I mean, we've had 4 years of these things running rampant. One of the things that I would just encourage our listeners to think about is actually, it's from a pastor out of Tulsa that I actually have listened to over the years, African-American pastor who took over a predominantly white church in a city where the Tulsa massacre was deeply rooted into this church's history, going back to the early 1900s. And I don't know if our listeners know all about the Tulsa massacre, but I would encourage them to go read about.
And that still
about those
permeates
events.
Tulsa today.
100%. And so you've got this situation where I would say there's not a lot of ultimate alignment in a lot of areas, just as looking at it. But this pastor's come in and he's really operated his church under the acronym of HOT, H-O-T. So humble, open, and transparent. And he's taken the attitude with the elders, with the city, with the churchgoers, and with the larger community. And he's come in and said, hey, this is how I'm going to operate the church. And this is how we're going to lead and steward our resources and our time in this community. And I think, frankly, that humble, open, and transparent would be a really good moniker for my generation. It takes them out of just this visceral, I'm right, you're wrong situation. And it automatically thrusts you into just a different way of viewing life and viewing the people around you. You can be humble, you can be open, and you can also share what you believe. It's not telling anybody to necessarily back off, but it's giving people the opportunity to be heard that may not agree with you. And so I think that's a really good example, and I think it's a good call to action for my generation to say, hey, want to be humble, open, and transparent, and want to go get to know the people on the other side.
Okay, so let's jump to that kind of second issue that I think is related to it. And that is that the institution of higher learning has really moved in a direction where instead of, my view, the focus is on education and learning. It's really on an ideological conveyance of a set of ideas. How did that come about? How did the institution of higher learning get hijacked?
Great question. I look at this very simply as the people graduating today, they've got majors that are all over the place. back in the day, you went to engineering school to go be an engineer. You went to business school to go into finance or accounting.
We'll talk about that part of it.
You did, like, in my view, very basic things. But now you've got activist professors that are teaching majors and classes that I would say are non-transferable to the working world, if that makes sense. But they're really just become echo chambers for indoctrination and telling people what they want to hear.
Well, and I think even more than that, Kyle, I agree with all that, but I think now they're putting themselves as a bubble outside of all society. Yeah. I mean, the reality of a lot of those majors is they're not applicable once you walk out of those institutions. There are no jobs associated. There's probably one more professorship somewhere in the world that does that, but there are no jobs. And so again, instead of educational institutions, and I went to a liberal arts school, but in that liberal arts school, the focus was teach you how to think, teach you how to solve problems, and you can apply that in a lot of different arenas, fields, and parts of disciplines. But now, again, the emphasis, again, doesn't seem to be on learning and education and preparing for somebody for the future. It's kind of almost kind of giving a set of thoughts, ideas, ideologies that are completely devoid from the rest of society.
It's ideological training that I don't think enables anybody to go grow and succeed outside of their own circle. People need to step outside their circle and they need to go look at, hey, how do I actually get some skills here that are going to prepare me for my future life?
So how did this happen?
I think
because you look at faculties, and it's very easy now. Most faculties, 95% on the left, and I don't, I'm not sure I don't want them to be 95% on the right either.
No.
I think again, what we're looking for is have some cross section of America, and we know that America is not 95% left. It's not 95% right either.
Correct.
But some cross section there that represents that, and it just seems to me any statistical look at faculties, administrations, et cetera, there's no way that you can say that it's a cross-section of society.
In a lot of ways, they found a safe place to go hide. I mean, it became this place where the institutions weren't going to challenge them. And by and large, the administrations and many of these institutions, especially in the Northeast, as you're well aware, are closer to 95% on the left as well. And again, to your point, it's not about having it just flip. Like, it doesn't do us any good if we just go to the other end of the spectrum. But that cross-section America, I think, has just not been, they haven't been invited into the conversation. In a lot of ways, you see that play out politically and in so many ways in our country, where you have this forgotten man and woman who's the backbone of the blue-collar part of our nation that drives us forward, that just is, that seat at the table is totally gone. And the higher education, the administrators, the professors, et cetera, they're the ones that have got the bully pulpit. So they're the teachers, they're the vaunted professors. You're going to listen to them just by mere stature of their title. And the kids haven't had the discernment to go in and say, hey, maybe I disagree with something, or maybe actually I don't think that's correct, or maybe I want to raise my hand, because they're afraid that in a social media first culture, a video first culture, that they're going to be demonized for, potentially expressing another opinion.
Yeah, I think the answer to my question is a question. And that is, we clearly allowed that to happen. Mm-hmm. Did it simply evolve, or was it an intentional move? And that may be rhetorical.
I have a lot of thoughts on that. And I have a lot of thoughts on how that actually plays out politically. Because if I think about how you change the hearts and minds of voters in this country, you start in the education system.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's just
that would actually be, if you look at a lot of early socialist and communist writings, it would be indicative of that. They would identify two areas. It would be education and the media. And we could start making some of the same arguments. We won't go there today on the media side too. Let's go one piece further on the education that, again, seems like a generational difference too. So I'm interested to get your perspective. So when I went through school, the World War II was a distant past, but it wasn't so far distance. We are today taping this on the 24th anniversary of 9/11. Mm-hmm. I wonder how many high school students could tell you what 9/11 was, which is actually more years away than it was from me seeing the end, or being born at the end of World War II. And World War II, again, was something that was part of my education. We spent a lot of time on it, and to think that we didn't know a lot about it, at least, is bizarre. But I wonder how many kids do that. And then I look at surveys of high school students today, and again, across the country, that have a difficult time telling you who fought the Civil War, who won the Civil War. Things like that, at least to me and my generation, is unfathomable to think that you haven't picked that up somewhere in your education over the course of the last 10 to 12 grades.
Well, in a lot of ways, 9/11, for so many reasons, and I was in second grade. I remember the morning I was being dropped off at school, and we heard it come over the radio, and got let out of the door and into the school, and then we got sent home early that day. And it was actually a very transformative moment for me. I got taken to my mom's office. She explained to me exactly what happened and what I was going to see on the news. And my parents did a really good job of parenting through it. But in a lot of ways, it was an attack on the ideological fabric of America. We really hadn't been attacked since Pearl Harbor in a lot of ways on the mainland.
Very much so.
We had been attacked around the world. We had lost service members. All those things were awful. But on the mainland, we felt invincible in a certain sense. We've got good neighbors north and south. We've got two oceans, east and west. And really, it wasn't something we thought about. And what's even more fascinating about that day is that for your generation, you'll know this well, we had just come out of a really bitter election fight. Gore and Bush hanging chads in Florida, the election going to the Supreme Court, but yet America was still together. It wasn't like the elections that we've gone through the last 3 to 4 cycles.
We haven't had an event since World War II that brought the nation together, as reflected in themes around the country, be it baseball games or that sort of thing,
Absolutely.
or even approval ratings of presidents.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting, I've actually discussed this with my girlfriend who's a few years younger than me. She doesn't even really remember the day, much less anybody who's called in high school or college today. They're not, obviously alive for it. And I think they miss how it changed a lot of the conversations in this nation, because it ultimately dragged us into war. And there were a lot of opinions on how that war goes, where that war goes, et cetera. And that was a start of a conversation that I don't think is finished in this nation.
Okay, but it's wider than just 9/11. I started there. I might have been guilty of that. But again, from what I see, surveys across the country would indicate it's not just 9/11. It's not just the Civil War identified. People can't tell you who was in World War II. They can't tell you if there's a World War III. I mean, how can we go through an education system and not have the basic fundamentals? I mean, not the depth of, Supreme Court hearing rulings, that sort of thing, but the basic depth of the major things that have kind of molded this nation, or the world for that matter.
Right.
How can we get to that point? Have we, from a generational standpoint, my generation prized history in that much?
We've lost an appreciation for it.
And this generation doesn't view history as being important?
No, I think this generation just understands the here and now because they're in a consumer culture. And that consumer culture is thrown in their face every single day on a screen or a TV or whatever that they see. And that allows them, it's like now and forward. The backward look is almost non-existent. The understanding of actually how World War II came about, how World War I came about, and why, and what happened in both wars, and the sacrifice and the cost. There's just not an appreciation for those things. And I think educationally, we've lost kind of like going back to basics in a certain sense. We've lost the ability to go back to basics, to educate the younger generation on how those things happen, and hopefully to avoid repeating them moving forward, because that's what history teaches you.
Yeah, but is part of that the way that the generations have learned? And again, I'll push you a little bit on this. We've talked about history, but if my guess is today, if you went into a high school and you asked them, who is the vice president of the United States? I would be stunned if you got to 50%. Again, I may be wrong, but I think I can show you examples of surveys that have done of who's X that would reinforce what I'm saying, but I don't have the evidence on that. But who is vice president? again, maybe I'm giving my generation a lot more credit than I should, but my sense was that people had a pretty good understanding of kind of the events around them and that sort of thing. So for better or worse, take that as a given for just a second. You can challenge it in a moment. But if that's the case, why is that? What has caused it? Is it the idea that there are smartphones and smart devices now where I don't need to know any of this? I can Google any question that I want. Mm-hmm. Is it that we've become so insular in our interpersonal relationships that we don't open up to kind of greater society and the issues in that? And I say that, but then I think there's a lot of young people that are really concerned about climate change and that sort of thing. So it can't be across the board.
No. The culture, especially the last 5 years, ever since COVID, it's become an isolationist type of culture in a lot of ways. And I think the media, cell phones,
go
et cetera.
further, define isolationist.
So isolationist, if I look at just like where people spend their time, they, like the younger generation would call it rotting. So they take a day, they spend 8 hours on their phone laying in bed. They just rot. And that's their slang term for it. But that slang term is a very real situation where they're playing games or looking at articles or they're sending text messages or Snapchats or whatever they're doing. And that rot, in a lot of ways, is actually indicative of what's really happening to them, which is they're not progressing forward. They're not learning. They're not being exposed to new ideologies or new ways of thinking. And they're just, again, into this isolationist, it's my world, and I decide what comes in and what comes out. I would say back in your generation, you went and played outside. You went and met the kids down the street. You made the effort to go learn about someone's life experience or their home life or their history or their grandparents. And that's just not as valued today. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think where that leads is you've got a culture that ideologically is less challenged because they're ideologically less open to being challenged.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem.
And we need to make a distinction too, because when we talk about devices and that sort of thing, it's accessing the news.
Sure.
There are a lot of folks, and my daughter's an example. I'm not sure she knows what a newspaper looks like, but I can tell you that she is as adept and up to speed on anything that's happening in the world today as I am. And in fact, arguably, she receives that a lot quicker. She uses her devices. So from an education standpoint, she uses the device to get to it. What I'm going at is, it seems to me there's a lot of folks that aren't using devices for that purpose. And as a result, they really don't understand what's happening around them.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I'd push you on the question first. Where do you get your information first on the news?
Myself?
Yeah.
Most of it now has evolved to digital.
Digital.
So I start with the Wall Street Journal. I still think that's kind of the easiest way to go. I am also a believer, however, that you want to get information sources from a lot of different venues. I believe that when I was a CEO, I never wanted to trust information flows. I worked at the White House at one point. I saw a president get in a scandal situation, largely because I think that he did not have access to a variety of information from different sources. It came from one that I think that's actually what got him in trouble. So I'm a great advocate of that. So in addition to the Wall Street Journal, which I probably use as kind of the primary, who do I trust?
Sure.
I'll go to the New York Times. I'll listen to Fox News. So I'll try to go around the gamut to things. I still enjoy every once in a while, I don't get a chance to do it, but sit down and read the newspaper. So I still get the Wall Street Journal, but I probably actually read a lot more words online now of the Wall Street Journal than I do out of the hard copy.
Yeah, it's amusing. My dad gets the Wall Street Journal in the paper form every morning, and I get my information through X.
Yeah.
And it's just such a generational difference where his information is general, typical newspaper format, as you can imagine. And my information is short snippets that have to be ferreted out whether they're true or not.
But then let's take that another step too, because that seems to be an issue. It seems to me that when you take a lot of the difficult challenges in front of us, and I can go political, I can go a whole host of different ways. I would have a tough time in trying to explain to somebody the issues in the Middle East in 140 characters. I would have a difficult time explaining the pros and cons of tariff in 140 characters. Now, I know they go more than 140 characters now, but
Right.
but at least they are small snippets.
Right.
How do you deal with that if you're actually going to understand an issue as opposed to, and I think the Republicans are as guilty as this as
Absolutely.
Democrats, is you got a lot of people back in Washington and they are real good with talking points, but do not try to have them go the second paragraph
The depth.
deep in the question because they will die.
Right.
How do we get to the point where people actually have the work ethic to go in and understand issues?
Well, I think that's what's so interesting. So I'll go on X and I'll find out what's trending or what's going on in the day. And then I go do my own research. So I go put it into Google or put it into wherever I'm going to go search. And, I want to go read, like, it's funny. I actually enjoy reading Al Jazeera for Middle Eastern news. I enjoy reading BBC online. I actually will stay up at night.
The Economist is probably actually one of the best publications.
You got it. The Economist is great. I actually will, on the economic side, I will go to bed watching the Bloomberg Asia market open, which is pretty nerdy, but it's another news source. It's another input. And it's all speaking to your question, which I desire that.
Well, interestingly, time-wise, given what we've got today, you're actually kind of foreseeing the next day.
It's the next day. That's why I watch it.
Which is an opportunity back when I never had.
Bingo. So, but I think what's problematic today is that you've got a younger generation that so wants to have their voice heard, recognized, realized, and they see this opportunity. If I get a short snippet out there, if I get a short TikTok video out or do something on Instagram, I can get noticed.
But, I think that brings us back full circle then.
Yeah.
Because that means that I want to tell you my opinion, but I don't want to hear your opinion.
Correct.
And I certainly don't want to debate it because I may not have the ammunition to be able to debate it.
100%.
There was, I sit on the board of the school that I went to, and I was in a conversation with one of the professors. And we started talking kind of this thing of differences in generations and learning and that sort of thing. And he made an interesting point to me. He goes, this generation of my students, so college students, and one of the top 5 rated schools in the nation, made the comment of, the students they don't memorize anything anymore. In part because give me a question, and at that time it was Google search. Now it's Google search plus AI.
Right.
I will get you the answer, so I don't need to do it. But what he was saying was the memorization and kind of having to go out and find facts for yourself and discern those, that's an important part of learning. It then leads to critical problem solving, which then is leading organizations, solving business problems, et cetera, and a lot follows on it.
Right.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in the world where there was no Instagram, there was no TikTok. And so I'll relate this back to sports. When I was younger, I used to watch Baseball Tonight on ESPN and SportsCenter, and my family would often joke that I had a PhD in these 2 television shows because I could tell you any stat of any player doing just about any sport. And it was a memorization situation because that was what I had access to. I didn't have House of Highlights or the SportsCenter app or see all the videos coming up on the screen. I just had to go in and learn it.
You sound old.
I know, I sound really old. And now that is totally the opposite of today, where it's, if I just want to access the stat of, what the on-base percentage is or what the shooting percentage is of some NBA player, like I can just go do it and find it and I got it on my phone. I don't need to know. But I think what is unfortunate about all of that is the quickness hinders the actual learning, where the quickness is like, you might have, the stat pulled up, but you may not know the history of the player or the team or how that player's progressed or what his stat line was years ago and how he's evolved. And that depth that we've talked about is where I think so much in this generation is just lacking. Yeah. And it's lacking politically. I think it's lacking economically. We've obviously, I've separately outside the podcast had conversations about monetary and fiscal policy, socialism versus capitalism, et cetera. But it's just lacking because people don't want to have the debate. They don't want to take the time to be a learner of the information. They just want to be a consumer and then a mouthpiece for the information.
Well, Kyle, I think we've kind of at least dealt with this higher education question and shown the real differences. It really begs the question of a lot of different things, though. Thinking about K-12, thinking about work ethics of different generations, how they approach empowerment, how they approach opportunities. Clearly things like our economic system, social versus capitalism, I think we'll hold that for another day, but good conversation.
Really good.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.